of many technical difficulties. So I just found out that there's no sound on Zoom. So Trish is logging on, and we're going to use her phone for sound.
I think I have to just change the phone. I'll leave it up to you, okay?
Okay. Okay. So, can you hear us on Zoom now? Okay, it worked. I'm telling you, it's the little things sometimes.
We could always hear.
So a few weeks ago, the bipeds in my house went to see The Conclave, a film starring some of my favorite actors, and it's about the deeply political and profoundly human, and by that I mean flawed, process of selecting a new pope. It was a great film, if a little predictable. Before the movie, there was one trailer that really intrigued me. It was pushing another religiously themed film called Bonhoeffer, pastor, spy, assassin. It was written and directed by Todd Komarnicki, who's known for books that get turned into movies that star tough guys, like Clint Eastwood. I have to admit, I was excited. I studied Dietrich Bonhoeffer's writing in seminary. He was one of the originators of the idea that came to be called social ministry, and later social justice ministry. He believed that ministry of the ordained, ministry of the people, ministry of any church, cannot legitimately exist without centering itself on countering oppression. It was a pretty radical idea in the 1930s. Bonhoeffer was born in Breslau, Germany in 1906, and he became a pastor in the Lutheran church of his childhood. As a public theologian, he joined the ranks of international thinkers like Reinhold Niebuhr here in the United States, who primarily explored the transcendent nature of God in a philosophy called neo-orthodoxy. Now, neo-orthodoxy is way too much to unpack in the time that we have here. So let's just say that Bonhoeffer was a complex man with complex beliefs that were often nuanced and mutable, but also sometimes very rigid. The important thing is that Bonhoeffer was one of the founders of the Confessing Church in Germany, which resisted the Third Reich's efforts to consolidate all Protestant faith into one church. It was meant to yield and reinforce the power of the Nazis, and that's what the Confessing Church resisted. In his 30s, Bonhoeffer looked like a typical pastor of the time. He was paunchy, a little doughy, balding on top. In photographs, he was always wearing boring, boxy wool suits and smoking. More professorial than priestly. But he was a towering figure in Germany and Europe in his very public resistance to and criticism of the Nazi agenda. In 1943, he was arrested by the Gestapo. He was tried and convicted of plotting to kill Hitler. At the age of 39, he was hanged, just as the regime was beginning to crumble. In the decades since his death, some self-styled scholars and historians have claimed that Bonhoeffer was involved in some way with the plot to assassinate the Fuhrer. But his family has always denied that. I don't believe it. He was ultimately a pacifist at his core. But back to that movie trailer for Bonhoeffer, pastor, spy, assassin. It presents the film as this kind of hyper-masculine, shoot-'em-up thriller in which the pastor is played by Jonas Dassler, a 28-year-old German actor with a jawline and a body that looked like they were chiseled out of marble. I laughed out loud when I saw it, and all the guns and the shooting and the explosions. I figured it was going to be a bit of fun with an impactful but, sort of unexciting real life story. Kind of an action adventure hagiography for dudes. So here's a fun religious 50-cent word for you, hagiography. A hagiography tells a story in a way that idealizes and elevates the subject, purposefully omitting any flaws or inconsistencies. There's a hagiography for every saint, canonized by the church or otherwise. My favorite experience of hagiography was visiting the city of Nobel, Ecuador, where Narcisa de Jesus was born in 1832. She was said to have flagellated herself daily, always beyond the point of unconsciousness. It said she would pass out from the pain and continue to whip herself. Gift shops in this little Ecuadorian town sold disciplines, the kind of small whip that she used. This was just months before she was canonized as a saint by Pope John Paul II, so the frenzy of local pride was intense. After an influential character has died, there's no harm in a little hagiography, right? I mean, we all need heroes, and people become heroes so much easier after they die. I mean, the dead make so few mistakes. So anyway, I mentioned Bonhoeffer, pastor, spy, assassin, in an email to a few folks here, suggesting that maybe we could get together and see it. It would be fun to see a social justice warrior film together and then have conversation afterward. Then a couple folks saw it and reported to me how deeply uncomfortable the film made them. One gave me a link to a movie review in Slate magazine by Angela Denker, who wrote, "In an age of rampant access to information, but elusive truth, we are all searching for quick ways to categorize one another and to claim the best heroes for our own personal camps. Such is also the case with Bonhoeffer, whose most popular biography was written not by a German theologian, but by an American conservative radio host and prominent Trump supporter, Eric Metaxas. In 2011, Metaxas published a #1 New York Times best-selling biography of Bonhoeffer. The Bonhoeffer film is not officially based on Metaxas's book, but it is yet another claim conservatives are making to Bonhoeffer's legacy. You see, Dietrich Bonhoeffer is quoted often, I found out, throughout Project 2025. In fact, the introduction to the ultra-conservative political playbook quotes his 1937 book, The Cost of Discipleship, with these words: "Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ, living and incarnate." Denker writes, "I see cheap grace around me when Christian leaders tell people they're inherently good and righteous as long as they're mainstream, politically conservative, middle to upper middle class American, regardless of how these American Christians treat the poor or love their neighbors." So the authors of Project 2025 took out of context a quote about grace by a wildly liberal and respected Christian theologian and twisted it into their anti-liberal purposes. It's the perfect example of proof texting. If proof texting were a holy activity worthy of canonization, the authors would be on the road to sainthood. As I said earlier, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a complex man with complex beliefs. His definition of grace was kind of narrow. It was undeniably Christian. The main message of his teaching, I think, based on his words and his deeds, was that Christians must live the gospel of Jesus, regardless of the personal risks or costs to self. And this commitment is symbolized by the cross. For Christians, the way our commitment to justice and pluralism and love are symbolized by our flaming chalice. I don't think Dietrich Bonhoeffer meant that the only way to attain the grace of God is through Jesus, through the cross. Or maybe he did, I don't know. He was a flawed man and a product of his flawed times, like every other human being that has ever lived. The point is, he repeatedly risked and ultimately gave his life to end the atrocities perpetrated by the Nazis, especially against the Jews. And the fact that Bonhoeffer risked his life for justice, wasn't that the ultimate act of grace? For him to do that, wouldn't he have to believe that all are worthy of grace, not just Christians? So let's take a few minutes to talk about this word grace. Shall we do a little word study? As we heard from the reading that Linda shared, in Judaism, the Hebrew word is hen, which Rabbi Lev defines as unmerited divine assistance, a virtue coming from God, a virtue like kindness, courtesy, or thoughtfulness. Now, the Dictionary of Christian Theology defines grace similarly as the unmerited gift of God's favor, love, and mercy, with a little addition, that it provides hope, forgiveness, and salvation. Now, some creeds will go so far as to say that the grace of God is only extended to Christians. I guarantee you that Christian nationalists like Eric Metaxas believe that. But the dictionary, the regular Oxford Dictionary, has broader definitions. And that makes sense because in English, the word grace comes from the Latin word gratia, meaning favor, charm, or thanks. Anyone can extend grace to anyone. It isn't exclusively divine, and it certainly is not exclusively priestly. What I think the Christian and Jewish perspectives bring to it is that grace is unmerited, unearned. In other words, we all receive grace not because of the good that we've done, but rather we receive grace despite the bad things that we all have done. Nobody is perfect, and nobody deserves grace more than anyone else. And nobody deserves grace less than anyone else. For me, spiritual memoirist Anne Lamott got it right when she wrote in her book, Traveling Mercies. I do not at all understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are, but does not leave us where it found us. Her reflection is one of ethereal grace. It's aspirational. It's humbling in the best sense, a reminder that I am flawed and broken and worthy of and capable of nothing less than greatness. Like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a paunchy theologian who sacrificed everything for not just his values, but to live out and die for his steadfast belief that we all have no other responsibility but to uphold justice. I'd hate to see Bonhoeffer, a hero of liberal theology, a story of the profound power of faith lived to its fullest, become co-opted exclusively by opportunists willing to rewrite history for a good soundbite. We who value the separation of church and state, who value equity and compassion, can't just let them lay claim to him. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Different from political liberals, we are religious liberals. Religious in the sense that we bind ourselves together again and again. And we are liberal theologically. Our beliefs are rooted in the experience of humanity and the knowledge that we need each other to survive. Religious liberals like us can't allow conservatives, especially evangelical Christian nationalists, to own religious language, claiming sole authority to it. We have to also own it. We must own a more inclusive, loving, forward-thinking understanding of words like grace, religion, faith, sacred, even consecration. not letting them become stagnant and narrow to be used as blunt instruments of the powerful few. We must be conversant in not only the vocabulary of faith, but conversant in the stories of the faithful, including the stories of the Abrahamic tradition, stories that have survived millennia because of the truth they tell about humanity. If we don't own our rightful religious authority, we cede that power of faith and religion to the people who would use it against us and give them the sole power to frame the Bible and anything else religious in any way that serves them. That's why I keep using religious language, despite the fact that I know it annoys some people to no end. It's why I keep calling Unitarian Universalism a religion and not a movement. Our historic authority, I believe, is worth preserving. Because as Rabbi Lev wrote, our job is to rescue grace, not from Christianity, but from our own suspicion that such acceptance of our imperfection is possible. Rescuing grace, in all religious language really, requires that we accept ourselves as flawed, no better and no worse than anyone else, with all the same responsibilities and shortcomings. If we're going to be the people that we hope to be, it's going to take a lot of grace, a lot of human grace. Please rise now for hymn number 27, a song whose words were written by Hildegard of Bingen, another Christian mystic and prophet who